We've got time for one more great dinner idea. Now, if you're like me, I have to have pizza from time to time, and we've got a great recipe to show you. Now, it varies a little bit from the Recipes for Life book, so just follow along. Now, what I've done is the first thing is put 1.5 cups of very warm distilled water into a mixing bowl. And it should be warm to the touch, not hot or boiling. And to that, I'm going to add about 2 tablespoons of raw and unfiltered honey. And with that in there, I'm going to add 1 package of dry yeast. Now, one of the variations in my recipe is I'm also going to add a couple capfuls of virgin olive oil. And what that does is it helps make the dough a little softer and it works better. Now, making pizza dough is easy and it's quick. Most people think it's a lengthy process, but it really only takes a few minutes to make a good dough. Now I'm going to mix this up, and then I'm going to just let it sit for about 10 minutes while I work on cutting up my vegetables. And we'll come back and then we'll add the flour. I do want to get our sauce going, and I'm going to show you a really simple and quick one. I'm going to use 1 can of organic tomato sauce. There's no salt added to these tomatoes. And then for seasoning, it's pretty simple. I'm going to add a little garlic. And now garlic, everybody has a preference, so you can put a little or a lot in, whatever you like. And a little Italian seasonings, 1 to 2 teaspoons. Just like that. It's pretty simple. And we'll add about a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. Now, I want to cook this down, so I'll put it on a medium heat and I'll let that cook for about 20 minutes while I'm getting everything else ready into a nice thick sauce that'll cling to our pizza crust. My yeast mixture has been sitting for about 10 minutes, and you can see the foam on top, so I know that it's active. So we're ready to add the flour. Now, one of the variations in my recipe is we're going to go ahead and use 1.5 cups of whole grain whole wheat flour. But instead of using a pastry flour, I'm going to use 1.5 cups of spelt flour. Now all we need to do is slowly combine the flour with our yeast mixture, a little at a time at first. And it'll be pretty soupy for that first 1.5 cups. But then it'll start getting thicker as I add the other 1.5 cups. Now we want to stir that into a nice dough. And when you're making this, if your dough looks like it's too runny, you can always add a little bit of flour until you get it about that texture of a bread dough where you can work it with your hands. Now once this is thoroughly mixed, like you see here, we can just go ahead and set that aside and let the dough begin to rise. And the other thing we should do now is go ahead and turn on our oven and set it for about 450 degrees because I bake the crust a little different than what it shows in the Recipes for Life book. Now before the oven gets too warm, I'm going to put this really well seasoned pizza stone in and let it preheat with the oven. If you don't have a pizza stone, that's okay. You can use a cookie sheet for your crust. Now the beauty of a pizza stone is that it'll give your pizza a really golden crust. I've prepared a number of vegetables for toppings for our pizza. First of all, I took 3 bell peppers, really ripe, sliced them thin, and then quartered them. I also took some tomatoes and sliced those really thin. I took some summer squash and grated it, and a medium onion and chopped that fine. I also sauteed a portobello mushroom by slicing it, adding it to a saucepan, adding a little bit of water, and under a medium heat cooked it for about 3 to 4 minutes. So those are going to be our toppings. Now my sauce has cooked down and it's nice and thick, and I've taken it off the heat to let it cool down while I'm making the pizza crust. And our dough, it's risen and it's ready to work into a pizza crust. Now the first thing you want to do is you want to sprinkle a little raw flour, whole wheat flour, on the top of the wet dough because that'll keep it from sticking to your hands. And then work around the bowl and slowly work that into a kneaded dough ball. And you want to keep adding flour so that that doesn't start sticking. Now, I've found in making these pizzas that the amount of time to let the dough rise, I've actually made it as quick as 15 to 20 minutes after my first mixing of the flour. And this dough should be workable, stiff, and when you get it into a ball like this, it shouldn't be sticking to your hands. Now there's enough dough here to make 2 medium-sized pizzas, but I want to show you a number of examples, so I'm going to make 3 small pizzas. Now you can just take the dough and squeeze off enough for 1 crust, and that's usually enough for the small pizza I'm going to make. Now I'm using a pizza spoon, and you may be using like a cookie sheet or a baking pan, but you want to cover it first with some flour and then some cornmeal, and that'll keep the dough from sticking to it while you work. Spread it around and keep it fairly thick on there. Now the dough should be dry, and you lay that down on your sheet and you're ready to work it out. And what I use is I want to use one of these little baker's rollers, and you can just start from the center and work out. If you don't have one, you can also just use your hands and slowly press it into shape. Now I like to press my dough out so that it's very thin, probably about 1/8 of an inch thick before we bake it, because don't forget, when this goes in the oven it'll rise and it'll get thicker. Now there's my pizza crust ready to go in the oven. If you want to, you can actually trim it off with a pizza roller and take off any extra thick edges. And I'll shake that just to make sure it's not stuck to my pan, like that. And it's ready to go in the oven. Now my oven I had set for 450 degrees. And I'll bake that for about 10 to 12 minutes, and I'll keep an eye on it because I want to get it when the crust just starts turning a golden brown.